Hey, I'm Chris from CJH1 and I'm here to give you a look at our new game. Inspired by games like Risk and Battleship, Tyrannis is a multiplayer strategy game that pits overstretched armies of mercenaries against small armies of rebels all over America. While the mercs try to stand their ground and hunt the rebels down, the rebels fight to drive those hired guns out of their country. So we'll get started with a quick skirmish. As you can see, we have the option of a campaign mode, but that's a stretch goal at the moment. Now let's get started with our skirmish. I'm thinking 3 players, 1 rebel and 2 mercenaries, so let's get that set up. Just tap on the player to select them, choose which side you want to join, and choose the faction. Let's go with the American mercs for player 1, and we'll go with the Japanese mercs for player 2. And for the rebels, let's go with Colombia. Now that the players are set up, let's choose our regions. In Tyrannis, we have 21 regions to choose from, and you can mix and match them as you wish. Let's try to make this quick though, so I'll just go with Central America. Now for turns, the base game has 50, but you can lower it down to 25 or raise it up to 500 if you're in for a marathon. But for this one, we'll just go with a regular 50. Last but not least is the scoring system. We have 3 options: points, regions, and states. Points means that the player with the most points by the end of the game automatically wins, while regions and states means that the players with the most regions and states can form a coalition. If that coalition of players has more than half the regions or states under their control, then all the players in the coalition win. Now that that's out of the way, let's begin. But before we get started, let's see how we can move the map. To move the map, just click and drag in the direction you want to move. Now let's go into the user interface. In the lower left hand corner is the menu button, where you can load and save games and return to the main menu. After that's the help screen, which gives you pointers on how to play the game. After that's the score screen, where you can see the regions, states, points, and units for each player, as well as the victory objectives. And for the rest of these, well, we'll get to them when we get to combat. Now let's go into the selection phase. During the selection phase, the mercenary players will be able to choose which regions they want to control when it's their turn. They can do this by tapping a state, and when they tap a state, a player also gets to choose where they want to deploy their base, where they can resupply and receive reinforcements every 10 turns. As you can see, when player 1 has chosen a state, it's player 2's turn. Let's put a base here. Now it goes back to player 1. If either of these factions were controlled by the computer, it would select a region automatically, then go to the next human mercenary player. So, let's just finish up selecting these regions. Now that we have these regions selected, we can get to deploying mercenary units. Simply tap a state to place 1 unit. So take Cascadia. There are 8 states there, so I can move up to 8 units there. See that number in the upper right hand corner? That's how many units you still have to deploy. Once all of those units are deployed, we'll hit next and move on to the next mercenary player. Or if we were the only mercenary player, we'd move on to rebel unit deployment. Now let's go on to player 2, and let's do the same thing here. And then hit next. Okay, let's play some rebel units. Unlike the mercenaries, rebel units are few in number, but they can be deployed anywhere on the map. If we have more than 1 region per rebel player, each rebel player gets to deploy 4 units. Otherwise, they can only deploy 2 units. Now that we got that out of the way, let's tap next. Okay, let's select one of these states by clicking on them. Now, since we don't have any movable units here, the map will black out. Still, we can see if there are any friendly attacking units here by looking in the lower right hand corner. So, let's try a state with units. As you can see here, most of the other states went black, some are now highlighted, and the one we selected has kept their usual color. So the highlighted states show where we can move. Mercenary units can move 2 spaces, as long as the rebel players don't control the region where they're headed. If the mercenary unit is in a state with a base, we can move them to any other state in the same region, as well as any other state with a base. Once a piece is placed, it can't be moved, but you can attack by pressing attack and then selecting the number of units you want to attack with. 1, 5, or all of the units in the state. As you can see, when we attack, a few things happen. First, the non-movable units are sent to attack before the movable units. Second is that a crosshair forms in the state, indicating the presence of an attacking unit on your side. Third is that when the state is attacked, the sidebar number next to a grayed out piece increases, since that shows the number of attacking units for each player. Now on to the rebel players. So we're going to do the same thing and select a state. As you can see here, fewer states were highlighted. Unlike the mercenary units, rebel units can only move one space. They're rebels after all. They don't have air bases or helicopters. And when we're done, we'll hit end turn. So here we are in the combat phase. Here we have our first battle, with the mercs trying to hunt down some rebels that don't exist. Anyways, when we're done, we'll just hit next and go on to the next turn. Okay, so we have a red piece in one of these states. This indicates that the owner of the state, or one of their allies, has attacked there. For this turn, their side can't attack, though they can move pieces there if they want to. But for now, let's just move on to the rebel players. Now, let's have a couple of these rebel units attack instead. And when we're done, we'll hit end turn and see what happens. Here we have the rebels outnumbering the mercs, which transfers control to them. Let's hit next to decide who gets the state. Okay, so the rebels get to choose amongst themselves to see who gets the state and a 1-unit reinforcement. As we saw earlier, New Leon has a base. Because of this, the state will experience base damage instead of turning over to the other side. This time we have just as many attackers as we have defenders, so we have a draw. All attacking units and all defending units are locked in combat until the stalemate is broken. Now that that's out of the way, let's go on to the next turn. So let's see what happens when the mercs retake a state. Like last turn, we have more attackers, except this time it's the mercs. And when we tap next, we get to choose who owns the state. Okay, now let's see what happens when the rebels take over an entire region. So let's do our usual thing. We'll hit next to decide who gets to own the state. Then we click on the player, but now that the rebels have taken over the entire region, we can choose which one of them gets to control the region itself by tapping on them. If you're playing for score, controlling a region gives you a ×2 multiplier for your score in the region. And if you're playing for regions, you get one more region for your coalition. Still, there are other benefits for the rebels every time they conquer a region. If a mercenary unit is outside the conquered region, they can't move into it. But if a mercenary unit is inside the region, they can't attack any of the states. To be honest, they can't really do anything except move to another region that their side still controls. As for the rebels, they have one region. Let's see what happens when they take all the regions. Let's fast forward a bit and see what happens. So here we are. Let's attack that last state and the mercs will have nowhere to run. So let's select a new state owner and see what happens next. Well, it's game over, mission accomplished, and all the rebel players win. Now let's see what happens when the mercs win. Okay, this one's a pretty easy one. Once the rebels are eliminated, all the mercenary players win. So what happens if the mercs are unable to eliminate the rebels and the rebels can't take over the map? If we hit the max number of turns and we're playing for regions, we need to form a coalition of players. We can see the number of regions we have in the coalition, the number of regions we need in the coalition, and the number of free slots in the coalition. To make things easier, this interface is color-coded. Green means that the player has the most regions out of all the players, so they're automatically locked into the coalition. White means that the player can be added to the coalition if there's an open slot. Blue means that the player has been added to the coalition, but we can click on them to remove them and open up a slot. And when we're done, we can click on the right arrow to go to the rebel players and do the same thing for them. When we're onto the rebel players, we can click the left arrow to go back to the mercenary players. But if we're done, we can click on the right arrow to submit the coalition. If the coalition is large enough, the game ends and all the coalition members win. If not, the game continues for 5 more turns and the players can try to start another coalition. And if we're scoring by states, we use a similar system. Players controlling the most states form a coalition amongst themselves, and they can click on other players to add them if there are open slots. When we're ready, we can click on the right arrow and submit the coalition. If the coalition controls over half the states, the game ends. If not, the game goes on for 5 more turns and they can try again. Anyways, that's how you play Tyrannis. To stay updated, be sure to follow us on Twitter and YouTube. And if you want to play the full version of the game, please consider backing Tyrannis on Kickstarter.